The dust hadn't settled in the old Zimmerman house in 15 years, and Victor Zimmerman could taste every grain of it as he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic in the sweltering July heat of 1883. His boots echoed against worn wood planks, creating a lonely rhythm that matched the beating of his heart as he surveyed what remained of his grandfather's estate in Oro Grande, California. The old man had passed 3 weeks prior, leaving Victor this crumbling monument to better days and a letter that simply read, "Everything you need is in the attic." Victor pushed open the attic door with his shoulder, the hinges screaming in protest. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating particles that danced in the stale air like tiny ghosts. Crates and trunks lay scattered across the floor, covered in sheets that had once been white but now bore the gray patina of abandonment. He moved carefully through the debris of a life well lived, searching for whatever his grandfather had deemed important enough to mention in his final correspondence. It took nearly an hour of searching before Victor found the trunk. Unlike the others, this one had been placed deliberately in the center of the attic, covered by a pristine white sheet that seemed to repel the dust around it. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled away the covering, revealing a beautifully carved cedar chest with brass fittings that gleamed despite the years. The lock had been left open, as if waiting for him. Inside, folded with meticulous care, lay the most exquisite wedding dress Victor had ever seen. The ivory silk seemed to glow in the dim light, embroidered with delicate patterns of wildflowers and vines that must have taken months to complete. Lace adorned the high collar and long sleeves, and seed pearls had been sewn into the bodice with such precision that they formed the shape of a heart. Victor lifted the dress carefully, marveling at its weight and the craftsmanship that spoke of both wealth and devotion. This was not the dress of a simple frontier woman. This was something far more valuable, far more mysterious. A photograph slipped from the folds and landed at his feet. Victor bent to retrieve it, his breath catching as he studied the image. A young woman stood in what appeared to be this very attic, wearing the dress he now held. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with dark hair piled atop her head and eyes that seemed to pierce through the photograph itself. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Willa Zimmerman, June 1868. May her memory live forever. Willa Zimmerman." Victor turned the name over in his mind, searching his memories for any mention of this woman, but came up empty. His grandfather had never spoken of her, nor had his father mentioned any relative by that name. Yet here was proof that she had existed, that she had worn this magnificent dress, and that someone had cared enough to preserve both with such reverence. A sound from below made Victor freeze. Footsteps, light and deliberate, crossed the main floor of the house. He had locked the front door when he arrived. He was certain of it. The house stood alone on a stretch of dusty road outside Oro Grande proper, with the nearest neighbor more than a mile away. No one should be here. Victor carefully folded the dress and returned it to the trunk, then made his way down the attic stairs as quietly as his heavy boots would allow. The footsteps had stopped, but he could sense a presence in the house as surely as he could feel the weight of the gun at his hip. He descended the main staircase slowly, one hand on the railing, the other hovering near his weapon. She stood in the parlor, illuminated by the late afternoon sun streaming through the western windows. For a moment, Victor thought he was looking at the photograph come to life. The woman wore a simple dress of deep blue calico, her dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, and her eyes were the same ones that had stared at him from the faded image. But that was impossible. The photograph was 15 years old, and the woman before him could not have been more than 25. "You are Victor," she said, her voice soft but steady. It was not a question. I am, Victor replied, his hand moving away from his gun but his guard remaining up. And you would be? Willa Zimmerman, she said simply. I have been waiting for you. Victor felt the floor shift beneath him, though he knew it was only his sense of reality tilting on its axis. That is not possible. The photograph upstairs shows Willa Zimmerman in 1868. You cannot be her. The woman moved toward the window, her movements graceful and unhurried. What did your grandfather tell you about this house, Victor? Nothing, he admitted. He left California when I was a boy. We lived in Missouri until he died. I never knew he still owned property here. Willa turned to face him, and in the fading light, he could see the pain that lived behind her eyes. Your grandfather was my brother, Charles Zimmerman. He built this house in 1867, when Oro Grande was nothing but a mining camp and a dream. I came to live with him the following year, after my husband died in the war. I was 19 years old and had been married for exactly 3 weeks before he left for battle. He never came home. Victor pulled out a chair from the dining table and sat heavily, trying to process what she was telling him. If you are truly Willa Zimmerman, then you would be in your 30s now, not barely past 20. A sad smile crossed her face. I was in my 30s once. I lived in this house for 7 years after the war ended. Charles wanted me to remarry, to find happiness again, but I could not bear the thought of replacing the man I had loved so briefly and lost so completely. Instead, I poured my grief into creating the most beautiful wedding dress I could imagine, the dress I wished I could have worn when I married Thomas. Every stitch was a prayer, every pearl a tear. When it was finished, I put it on and climbed to the attic, wanting to see myself in the mirror up there, wanting to imagine what might have been. She paused, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. That is where I died, Victor. My heart simply stopped, overwhelmed by sorrow and longing. Charles found me there the next morning, still wearing the dress. He buried me in it, or so he thought. But somehow, some part of me remained tied to this house, to that dress, to the life I never got to live. Victor wanted to dismiss her words as madness, wanted to believe there was a rational explanation for the young woman standing before him. But he had traveled enough, seen enough of the strange and unexplained in the territories, to know that the world held mysteries beyond human understanding. Why can I see you now? Why are you here in this form? I do not fully understand it myself, Willa admitted, moving closer to him. For 15 years I have existed in the shadows of this house, watching the dust gather, watching Charles grow old and leave, watching the house fall into disrepair. I could not touch anything, could not make myself known. I was a whisper, a chill in the air, nothing more. But when you opened that trunk, when you touched the dress, something changed. The connection that had kept me bound began to shift, and when you looked at my photograph, when you spoke my name in your thoughts, I became solid again, present again. Victor stood and walked to where she stood, stopping just short of touching her. You are truly here. This is not a dream or a fever. I am here, she confirmed, though I do not know for how long or what it means. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, and touched her hand. It was warm and solid, as real as his own. The contact sent a shock through both of them, a spark of something Victor could not name but felt in his very bones. Willa gasped and pulled her hand back, staring at her fingers as if seeing them for the first time. I can feel, she whispered. For 15 years I felt nothing but cold emptiness, and now I can feel the warmth of the sun, the texture of this dress, the touch of your hand. Victor found himself drawn to her in a way he could not explain. Perhaps it was the mystery of her existence, or perhaps it was simply that she was the most captivating woman he had ever encountered. What happens now? I do not know, Willa said honestly. I have been given a second chance at presence, but I do not know if it is permanent or merely borrowed time. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the parlor in shades of gold and amber. Victor made a decision that felt both reckless and entirely right. Then we should not waste whatever time we have. Tell me about yourself, Willa Zimmerman. Tell me everything. They talked through the evening and into the night. Victor lit oil lamps and found dusty bottles of wine in the cellar that had somehow survived the years. Willa spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, of her family's textile business, of meeting Thomas at a dance, and falling in love with a speed that scandalized her mother. She described their brief marriage, the joy of those 3 weeks, and the crushing weight of the letter that informed her of his death at Antietam. Victor shared his own story, growing up on a farm in Missouri, learning to shoot and ride before he learned to raid, and the restlessness that drove him west at 18 to make his fortune. He had worked cattle drives, served briefly as a deputy in Kansas, and tried his hand at prospecting before settling into work as a ranch foreman outside of Santa Fe. He was 30 years old, unmarried, and beginning to wonder if he would ever find a woman who understood the wildness that lived in his heart. "You speak of wildness," Willa said as they sat across from each other at the dining table, the wine loosening words that might otherwise have remained unspoken. "But I hear a man searching for roots, for a place to belong. You have spent 12 years running from something, Victor. What is it?" The question struck deeper than he expected. "Ordinariness," he said after a long pause. "My father wanted me to take over the farm, to marry the neighbor's daughter, to live and die within 10 miles of where I was born. It felt like a trap, like watching my life end before it had truly begun. So I ran and I kept running, always looking for something more, something bigger. But lately, I wonder if I was wrong, if what I was running from was actually what I needed most." Willa reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture feeling both natural and momentous. "I spent my entire adult life mourning what I lost, so focused on the past that I forgot to live in the present. I sewed that dress as a monument to my grief, and it became my prison. Maybe we are both here in this moment because we need to learn the same lesson." "What lesson is that?" Victor asked, his thumb unconsciously stroking the back of her hand. "That life is not in the past or the future, but in the choices we make right now in this moment." She smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "I have been given an impossible gift, Victor. I am here, alive in a way I have not been since 1875. I do not know if this will last until morning or if I have years ahead of me. But I know that I do not want to waste a single moment of it." Victor felt something shift in his chest, a wall he had built years ago beginning to crumble. He had known this woman for mere hours, yet he felt more connected to her than to anyone he had met in his entire life. "What do you want, Willa? If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be?" She stood, still holding his hand, and pulled him gently to his feet. "I want to live, Victor. I want to feel the sun on my face and the wind in my hair. I want to laugh and dance and taste food that actually satisfies hunger. I want to ride a horse across open country and swim in a river and do all the things I thought I would never experience again. Will you show me? Will you help me live?" "Yes," Victor said without hesitation. "For as long as you are here, for as long as this miracle lasts, I will show you everything this world has to offer." They sealed the promise with an embrace that felt like coming home after years of wandering. Willa rested her head against Victor's chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, marveling at the simple reality of human contact. Victor held her carefully, as if she might disappear if he held too tight, and breathed in the scent of lavender that clung to her hair. When they finally drew apart, the night had grown deep around them. Willa looked toward the stairs, a shadow of concern crossing her face. I do not know if I can sleep or if I need to. I do not know the rules of whatever this is. Then we will figure them out together, Victor assured her. There are bedrooms upstairs, untouched since my grandfather left. You can take whichever one you like, and I will take another. We will see what the morning brings. Willa chose the room that had once been hers, a corner bedroom with windows facing east and south. The furniture sat under dusty sheets, but underneath, Victor found a brass bed with a surprisingly intact mattress, a wardrobe that still held some of her old clothes, and a vanity with a mirror that reflected her face as clearly as any living woman's. "This is remarkable," Willa said, studying her reflection. "I look exactly as I did the day I died, not a day older, not a mark of the years that have passed." Victor stood in the doorway, giving her privacy but unable to look away. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "You must have broken hearts all across Philadelphia." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I only ever loved one man, Victor, and I lost him before we truly had a chance to begin. I wore mourning for 7 years, dressed in black, closed my heart to every possibility. I thought I was being faithful to his memory, but now I wonder if I was simply afraid. Afraid of feeling that much again, afraid of the pain that comes with love." "And now?" Victor asked quietly. Willa crossed the room to stand before him. "Now I think I have been given a chance to choose differently. I do not know if what I feel is real or simply the euphoria of existing again, but when I look at you, Victor, I do not feel afraid. I feel alive." He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms rough against her smooth skin. "I have never believed in fate or destiny. I have always thought we make our own way through sheer stubbornness and will. But you, Willa, you make me question everything I thought I knew. How can I meet a woman who has been dead for 15 years and feel like I have known her my entire life? Perhaps some souls are meant to find each other, no matter how impossible the circumstances," Willa suggested, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing every detail. Victor wanted to kiss her then, wanted it with an intensity that shocked him. But something held him back, a sense that this moment was too fragile, too new for such intimacy. Instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture that was somehow both chaste and deeply personal. "Sleep if you can," he said softly. "I will be just across the hall. If you need anything, call for me." Willa nodded, reluctant to let him go but understanding the need for space, for time to process the impossible reality they found themselves in. She watched him leave, then turned to explore the room that had once been her sanctuary and her prison. Victor lay awake in the room across the hall, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the day. He was a practical man, someone who dealt in tangible realities. The weight of a rope, the speed of a horse, the trajectory of a bullet. Ghosts and miracles were not part of his worldview. Yet he could not deny what he had experienced, what he had felt when he touched Willa's hand. Somewhere in the depths of the night, exhaustion finally claimed him. He dreamed of a woman in a white dress, dancing alone in an attic while dust motes swirled around her like stars. Morning came with golden light streaming through the windows and the sound of birds singing in the cottonwood trees outside. Victor woke with a start, his first thought for Willa. He threw on his clothes and crossed the hall, knocking gently on her door. "Come in," her voice called, and relief flooded through him. She stood at the window, backlit by the rising sun, wearing a dress of soft green cotton that she must have found in the wardrobe. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and her face glowed with wonder. "It is real," she said as he entered. "I slept, Victor. I had dreams. I woke up. This is not some fleeting moment. I am truly here." He crossed the room and took her in his arms, the embrace feeling even more right than it had the night before. "You are here," he confirmed. And we have a whole day ahead of us. What would you like to do first?" Willa pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Everything. I want to do everything." They started with breakfast, raiding the supplies Victor had brought with him and cooking together in the kitchen. Willa marveled at the simple pleasure of cracking eggs, of smelling bacon sizzling in the pan, of tasting coffee that actually satisfied her senses. They ate at the kitchen table, their knees touching beneath it, and talked about the changes that had occurred in the 15 years since her death. "Oro Grande has grown," Victor told her. "It is no longer just a mining camp. There are proper buildings now, a church, a school. The railroad came through 5 years ago, connecting us to Los Angeles and San Francisco. The world is changing faster than anyone could have imagined." "I would like to see it," Willa said. "The town, the people, all of it, but I am afraid." "Of what?" She set down her fork, her expression troubled. "What if someone recognizes me? Charles told people I was buried in the cemetery. There is a headstone with my name on it. If I simply appear in town, alive and unchanged after 15 years, what will people think? What will they do?" Victor considered this, recognizing the validity of her concern. "Then we will be careful. We will say you are a distant cousin, recently arrived from back east. Zimmerman is a common enough name that it should not raise too many questions. And anyone who might have known you well has likely moved on. Mining towns are transient by nature." "You would lie for me?" Willa asked. "I would do whatever necessary to keep you safe," Victor replied with complete sincerity. "You are a miracle, Willa, and I will not let anyone take that away." They rode into Oro Grande late that morning, sharing Victor's horse since there was only one saddle, and Willa had expressed delight at the prospect of riding close to him. She sat in front of him, his arms around her as he held the reins, and every step of the horse pressed them closer together. The town had indeed grown since Willa's time. The main street boasted a dozen substantial buildings now, including a general store, a bank, a hotel, and a saloon that looked far more respectable than the tent establishments she remembered. People moved about their business with purpose, a mix of miners, merchants, and families trying to build something permanent in the California desert. They stopped first at the general store, where Willa needed clothes and supplies if she was going to remain at the house. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Patterson, showed no recognition when Willa introduced herself as Victor's cousin from Philadelphia, recently arrived to help him settle his grandfather's estate. "It is about time someone took care of that old place, Mrs. Patterson said as she helped Willa select ready-made dresses and undergarments. "Charles Zimmerman was a good man, but he let the house go to ruin after his sister passed. Tragic story that. She was so young." Willa's hand tightened on the fabric she was examining, but her voice remained steady. "What happened to her?" "Died of a broken heart, they said," Mrs. Patterson replied, shaking her head. "Lost her husband in the war and never recovered. Charles found her in the attic, wearing the wedding dress she had made. It broke him, I think. He left California shortly after and never came back." Victor placed a supportive hand on Willa's shoulder, feeling the tension in her muscles. "That is indeed tragic, but life moves forward, does it not? We honor the dead by living well." "Wise words, young man," Mrs. Patterson agreed. "Now, will you be needing anything else?" They left the store with packages and a story that seemed to satisfy the town's curiosity. Victor showed Willa the rest of Oro Grande, pointing out the changes and the buildings that had stood since her time. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, where Willa reveled in the simple pleasure of eating food she had not prepared herself, and visited the church, where, according to town records, her funeral had been held. "It feels strange," Willa admitted as they stood in the small cemetery behind the church. knowing that everyone believes I am buried here under that stone. Victor studied the modest headstone. Willa Zimmerman, 1849–1875, beloved sister, gone but not forgotten. You are not buried here, though. You are alive and standing beside me. Whatever happened, whatever miracle brought you back, you do not owe your existence to anyone's expectations or beliefs. You are free, Willa, free to be whoever you want to be. She turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. I want to be someone who lives without fear, someone who takes chances and embraces joy, someone worthy of this second chance I have been given. You are already all of those things, Victor assured her. You just have to believe it. They rode back to the house as the sun began its descent. Both of them more comfortable with the silence between them than many people were with conversation. Willa rested against Victor's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, and allowed herself to imagine a future that stretched beyond the next day or week. That evening, after a dinner of beans and cornbread, Willa made a request that surprised Victor. "Will you dance with me? Here. Now." Victor looked around the parlor, where they had cleared some of the dust, but made little other progress in restoring the room. "Right here, right now," Willa confirmed. "I have not danced since before Thomas left for war. I want to remember what it feels like to move with music, to be held by someone while the world spins around us." "I should warn you that I am not much of a dancer," Victor said, but he was already moving toward her. Ranch hands and cattle do not require much in the way of waltzing skills. Willa laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Then I will teach you. It is simple, really. Just follow my lead." She began to hum a tune, something slow and sweet that reminded Victor of summer evenings and stars just beginning to appear. Willa took his right hand in her left and placed his other hand at her waist, then began to move, guiding him through the basic steps of a waltz. At first, Victor was stiff and self-conscious, too aware of his boots and his rough hands and his complete lack of grace. But Willa was patient, and as they moved around the parlor, he began to relax into the rhythm. She hummed different tunes, some quick and lively, others slow and romantic, and they danced until the candles burned low and their feet ached. "You are a natural," Willa said as they finally stopped, both slightly breathless. "I had an excellent teacher," Victor replied, still holding her close. "Thank you for this. I did not know I needed it until it happened." "That is the best kind of gift," Willa said softly. "The kind you do not know you are missing until it appears in your life." They stood together in the candlelight, and Victor knew that the moment had come. He lowered his head slowly, giving Willa every opportunity to pull away, but she did not. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him, and their lips touched for the first time. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, two people learning the shape and taste of each other. But then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more necessary. Willa's arms went around Victor's neck, and his hands tightened at her waist, pulling her closer. They kissed like people starving for connection, for passion, for the simple reality of being alive and together. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. Victor rested his forehead against Willa's, struggling to control his breathing and his desire. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. "I know it is too soon, too impossible, but I cannot deny what I feel." "It is not too soon," Willa whispered. "Time works differently for us, Victor. I have been waiting for 15 years to feel alive again, and you have been searching for 12 years to find where you belong. Maybe this is exactly the right time. Maybe we are exactly where we are meant to be." "I want you to stay," Victor said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "Not just for now, not just until we figure out what happened to you. I want you to stay forever. I want to build a life with you here in this house, in this town." I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Tell me that is not madness." Willa's smile was radiant. "If it is madness, then let us be mad together. Yes, Victor, I will stay. For as long as this miracle lasts, for as long as I am able, I will stay with you." They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Victor felt something settle in his chest that he had not even known was unsettled. This was home. Not the house, not the town, but this woman in his arms. This was what he had been searching for all along. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and comfortably domestic. Victor began the work of truly restoring the house, fixing the roof and the broken windows, clearing out the accumulated debris of years. Willa helped where she could, but more often, she simply reveled in the experience of living. She baked bread and felt the dough beneath her hands. She planted a garden and felt the soil between her fingers. She walked through Oro Grande with Victor and felt the sun on her face and the admiring glances of men who saw only a beautiful young woman, not a ghost returned from death. They attended church on Sunday, sitting in the back pew and singing hymns together. The pastor, a young man who had arrived in town only 5 years earlier, welcomed them warmly and asked no uncomfortable questions. After the service, several townspeople approached to introduce themselves, and Willa handled each interaction with grace and growing confidence. "You are a natural," Victor said as they walked home afterward. "I was worried you might feel out of place, but you seem completely at ease." "I feel free," Willa admitted. "For the first time in so long, I feel like I can simply be myself without the weight of grief or expectations. Everyone here sees me as just another person, not as poor Willa who died of a broken heart. It is liberating." That afternoon, they sat on the newly repaired porch and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Willa leaned against Victor, his arm around her shoulders, and spoke about something that had been on her mind. "I want to visit the attic again," she said quietly. "I need to see the dress to face the place where I died." Victor tensed slightly. "Are you certain?" "We do not have to do anything that might upset you." "I am certain," Willa said. "That dress represents everything I lost and everything I was too afraid to reach for again. I need to see it not as a monument to grief, but as a reminder of survival. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Victor assured her. "When do you want to go?" "Now," Willa said, standing and offering him her hand, "while I have the courage." They climbed the stairs together and Victor pushed open the attic door. The space looked different in the afternoon light, less menacing and more melancholy. The trunk still sat where Victor had left it, the wedding dress visible through the partially open lid. Willa approached it slowly, her steps measured and deliberate. She knelt beside the trunk and lifted the dress carefully, holding it up to the light. "I put so much of myself into this," she said softly. "Every stitch was perfect, every detail exactly as I imagined. I thought if I could create something beautiful enough, it would somehow fill the emptiness inside me." "But it could not," Victor said gently, kneeling beside her. "No," Willa agreed. "Beautiful things cannot heal a broken heart. Only time and choice and love can do that. I know that now." She folded the dress carefully and placed it back in the trunk. "I think I would like to keep it, though, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder of transformation. I died wearing this dress, and now I live again. That means something." Victor helped her to her feet, and they stood together in the attic where her first life had ended and, in a way, her second had begun. "What would you like to do with it?" Willa considered for a moment, then smiled. "I think I would like to alter it. Make it into something new, something that represents who I am now rather than who I was then." "Would that be sacrilege?" "It would be perfect," Victor said. "Nothing stays the same forever, Willa. Everything transforms, everything grows. Why should your dress be any different?" They spent the next week working on the house during the day and talking late into the night. Victor learned that Willa had a sharp mind for business, having grown up watching her father run his textile company. She suggested improvements to the property that would make it more profitable, including converting part of the land into an orchard and possibly raising sheep for wool. "California has a growing market for quality goods," she explained as they sat in the parlor, reviewing sketches she had made. "If we could establish ourselves as providers of fine wool and produce, we could build something sustainable here." Victor looked at her plans with growing admiration. "You have thought about this thoroughly. But Willa, this assumes you will be here long term. We still do not know if whatever brought you back is permanent." Willa set down her pencil and took his hands. "I wake up every morning, Victor. I eat and sleep and feel and live. I am as real as you are, as solid as this table. Whatever happened, whatever miracle occurred, I choose to believe it is permanent. I choose to believe I have been given a true second chance, not just a temporary reprieve. Can you believe that with me?" Victor pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I can believe anything if you are beside me." As the weeks passed, they became a fixture in Oro Grande. Victor Zimmerman and his cousin Willa, working to restore the old Zimmerman place, attending town functions, contributing to the community. People commented on how well suited they seemed, how comfortable they were together, and several of the older women began to make pointed remarks about cousins not being so close as to prevent courtship. "They think we should marry," Willa said one evening, laughing as she recounted a conversation with Mrs. Patterson. "She told me that a young woman needs a husband, and that I should not let propriety prevent me from finding happiness with a good man, even if we are related by blood." Victor, who was replacing floorboards in the dining room, paused in his work. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I would keep her advice in mind," Willa said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "But Victor, it did make me think. We cannot continue to claim I am your cousin indefinitely. Eventually, someone will question it. Eventually, we will need to decide what we are to each other, publicly if not privately." Victor set down his hammer and crossed to where she sat. "Privately, I know exactly what you are to me. You are the woman I love, the woman I want to spend my life with. But publicly, yes, we have a problem. If I court you openly, people will eventually discover that we are not actually related, which will raise questions we cannot answer. But if we maintain the cousin story, we cannot truly be together." Willa pulled him down to sit beside her. "There is a solution, you know. We could tell people the truth, or at least a version of it." "What do you mean?" "We could say that you discovered, while settling your grandfather's estate, that he had another branch of the family back east. That I am a Zimmerman by marriage, not blood. That I was widowed young and came west seeking a fresh start. All of that is technically true." Victor considered this, seeing the logic in her suggestion. "It could work. But Willa, if we go down that path, if we present you as unrelated to me, then I am going to court you properly. I am going to make my intentions clear to the entire town. Are you ready for that?" "I have been ready since the moment you found that dress," Willa said softly. "I am yours, Victor, if you will have me." He kissed her then, long and deep, a kiss that promised forever. When they finally broke apart, he said, "Then let us do this right. Let me court you. Let me show the entire world that you are the most precious thing in my life, and when the time is right, let me make you my wife in truth." Willa's eyes filled with tears of joy. Yes, to all of it, yes. They began their public courtship the following Sunday, attending church together and afterward announcing to anyone who would listen that they had discovered they were not, in fact, closely related. The news spread through Oro Grande like wildfire, and by the next day, Victor found himself receiving knowing nods and approving smiles from nearly everyone he met. He courted Willa with old-fashioned propriety, calling on her formally at the house, bringing her flowers from the newly planted garden, taking her on chaperoned walks through town. It was all slightly absurd, given that they lived under the same roof and were already deeply in love, but Willa insisted they do things properly. "I never had this the first time," she explained as they sat in the parlor while Mrs. Patterson pretended to read in the corner, serving as an impromptu chaperone. "Thomas and I met and married so quickly that there was no real courtship. I want to experience this with you, want to treasure each stage of our relationship." So Victor played his part, speaking formally when others were present, stealing kisses only when they were alone, and counting the days until he could make Willa his wife in the eyes of God and the law. 2 months after Willa had first appeared, Victor took her on a picnic to a spot overlooking the valley. They sat on a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, eating the lunch Willa had prepared and watching hawks circle in the clear blue sky. "I have something to ask you," Victor said when they had finished eating. "Though I suspect you already know what it is." Willa smiled, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I might have some idea." Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a simple gold band set with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. "This is not much," he said, "but it is honest, and it is given with all the love in my heart. Willa Zimmerman, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Willa held out her hand, trembling slightly. "Yes, Victor. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They kissed beneath the cottonwood tree, and Willa felt her heart expand with a joy she had never thought to experience again. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened," Victor said, holding her close. "We have found each other against all odds, against death itself. Nothing can separate us now." They were married 6 weeks later in the little church in Oro Grande, surrounded by the townspeople who had come to accept them as part of the community. Willa wore the wedding dress she had altered, transforming the heavy ivory silk into a more modern style with a simpler bodice and a shorter train. The seed pearls still formed a heart over her breast, a reminder of what the dress had been and what she had survived. Victor wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his boots polished to a shine. When he saw Willa walking down the aisle toward him, he felt his breath catch. She was radiant, glowing with happiness and utterly alive. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both should live. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Victor kissed Willa with such tenderness that several women in the congregation had to dab at their eyes. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Willa danced with Victor first, then with several other men from town, including the banker and the blacksmith and even old Mr. Henderson, who had to be 90 if he was a day. She laughed and spun and felt completely, perfectly alive. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Victor and Willa slipped away to the house. They had spent the previous week preparing for this night, cleaning and decorating the master bedroom, filling it with candles and flowers and all the trappings of romance. Willa stood in the center of the room, suddenly shy. She had been married before, but that had been so long ago and she had been a different person then. Victor was patient, giving her time to adjust, to breathe, to find her courage. "We do not have to do anything tonight except sleep," he said gently. "There is no rush, Willa. We have the rest of our lives." But Willa shook her head, reaching for the buttons of her dress. "I want this, Victor. I want you. I have spent 15 years feeling nothing, being nothing. Tonight I want to feel everything." Victor helped her with the buttons, his fingers clumsy with desire and tenderness. The dress fell away, revealing the chemise and petticoats beneath, and then those two were removed until Willa stood before him in nothing but candlelight and love. She was beautiful, every curve and line of her perfect in his eyes. Victor shed his own clothes quickly, then lifted Willa and carried her to the bed. They came together with a passion that was both fierce and tender, two souls joining as completely as two bodies could. Willa cried out his name, and Victor buried his face in her hair, overwhelmed by the intensity of what he felt. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, hearts beating in synchrony. Willa traced patterns on Victor's chest, her fingers exploring the scars he had collected over the years. "Tell me about this one," she said, touching a long mark along his ribs. "Cattle drive when I was 20, Victor said. A steer decided he did not want to go where we were herding him." His horns were very persuasive. Willa kissed the scar, then moved to another on his shoulder. "And this? Bar fight in Abilene. I learned an important lesson that night about when to keep my mouth shut." She continued her exploration, learning the map of his body through his scars and stories. Victor did the same with her, though her skin was unmarred by injury, smooth and perfect as porcelain. "How is this possible?" Victor wondered aloud. "You died, Willa, you were buried. Yet here you are, as real and solid as anyone I have ever known. How?" Willa propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him seriously. "I have thought about this constantly, trying to understand. I think it has something to do with the dress, with the intensity of emotion I poured into it. I think I somehow bound myself to it, and when you touched it, when you thought of me, it created a connection that pulled me back." "Magic?" Victor asked skeptically. "Call it what you will," Willa said. "Love, magic, faith, miracle, does it matter? I am here. I am real. I am yours." Victor pulled her down for a kiss. "You are mine," he agreed, "and I am yours. From this day forward, come what may." They made love again, slower this time, learning the rhythm and preferences of each other's bodies. When they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both felt a peace they had never known before. The months that followed were the happiest of either of their lives. They worked together to build the property into something prosperous, planting the orchard Willa had envisioned and acquiring a small flock of sheep. Willa's instincts about the market proved correct, and they soon had buyers in Los Angeles and San Francisco eager for their wool and produce. They also became active members of the Oro Grande community, hosting dinners at their home and attending every town function. Victor was elected to the town council, and Willa organized a sewing circle that met weekly to create quilts for families in need. They were respected, liked, and seen as pillars of the growing community. But their greatest joy was private, found in the quiet moments when it was just the two of them. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the desert. Evening walks through their growing orchard, discussing plans and dreams. Nights in their bed, exploring the depths of passion and tenderness that existed between them. A year after their wedding, Willa came to Victor with news that changed everything. They were in the orchard, checking the progress of the young fruit trees, when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am with child," she said simply. "I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you." Victor stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had said. "But how is that possible? You were dead, Willa. Can someone who died truly create life?" Willa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Apparently so. I am as alive as you are, Victor. My heart beats, my blood flows, my body functions as any woman's does. Why should I not be able to conceive and bear a child? Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A child," he breathed. "Our child. Willa, this is beyond anything I dared hope for." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "I am terrified and overjoyed in equal measure," Victor admitted. "But yes, I am happy, so very happy." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Victor fretted over Willa constantly. He hired a doctor from Los Angeles to come and examine her regularly, wanting to ensure that everything was proceeding as it should. The doctor, a practical man named Harrison, found nothing unusual. "Your wife is in perfect health," he reported after one examination. "The baby is growing well, and I see no cause for concern. She should deliver sometime in early spring." Willa bloomed with pregnancy, her already beautiful face taking on an ethereal glow. She continued to work in the house and garden as long as she was able, insisting that she felt wonderful and that pregnancy was not an illness to be coddled through. The women of Oro Grande rallied around her, hosting a party where they presented her with blankets and baby clothes and all manner of advice, some helpful and some ridiculous. Willa accepted it all with grace and gratitude, touched by the genuine affection these women had for her. "They have become my friends," she told Victor that night. "I never expected that. I thought I would always feel like an outsider, someone living a borrowed life, but they have welcomed me completely." "You are not an outsider," Victor said, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "You are Willa Zimmerman, my wife, soon to be the mother of my child. You are as real and as much a part of this community as anyone." Their son was born on a cool March morning in 1885, arriving with a healthy cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. They named him Thomas Victor Zimmerman, honoring the husband Willa had lost and the new life she had built. Willa held her son for the first time and felt her heart break open with love. He was perfect, from his tiny fingers to his shock of dark hair. When he opened his eyes and looked at her, she saw awareness there, recognition, as if he knew she was his mother on some fundamental level. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered. "I am your mama, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Victor sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at his son with wonder. "I never knew I could feel this much," he said hoarsely. "I thought loving you was the limit of what my heart could hold, but this is something else entirely." "This is family," Willa said softly. "This is what I mourned losing when my first husband died. This is what I thought I would never have. And now here we are, the three of us, complete." Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to delight in every aspect of living. He nursed eagerly, slept peacefully, and smiled early. Willa and Victor took turns walking him at night when he fussed, singing lullabies and telling him stories about the world he would grow up in. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the family continued to thrive. The orchard began producing fruit, and the sheep flock grew large enough to provide substantial income. Victor and Willa hired help for the property, including a young couple from Mexico who proved invaluable in managing the day-to-day operations. Willa had feared in the early days after her return that she might suddenly disappear, that whatever miracle had brought her back might be revoked without warning. But as the years passed and she remained solidly, undeniably alive, that fear faded. She had been given a true second chance, not a temporary reprieve, and she intended to make the most of every moment. When Thomas was 3 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time, she was more confident, less afraid of the process. Their daughter arrived in the autumn of 1888, a tiny girl with Victor's eyes and Willa's dark hair. They named her Grace, because that was what she represented: unmerited favor, unexpected blessing, pure gift. life settled into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary. Victor managed the business side of their growing enterprise while Willa oversaw the household and raised the children. They attended church every Sunday, hosted dinners for friends and neighbors, and served their community in countless small ways. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions about how things worked and why the sky was blue and what made the horses run so fast. Grace was quieter but equally intelligent, often found in the garden talking to the plants or sitting very still to watch a butterfly land near her. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Grace was 4, Willa and Victor sat on the porch after the children had been tucked into bed. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular fashion, painting the sky in purples and golds. "You ever think about it?" Willa asked quietly. "About how impossible all of this is?" Victor took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Every day," he admitted. "Every single day I wake up beside you and marvel that you are real, that this life is real. But Willa, impossible or not, it is ours. We have built something beautiful here." Willa rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think that I had been given a second chance to get things right, to live the life I should have lived if Thomas had not died in the war. But I have come to realize that is not quite accurate. I have been given something different, something better. A chance to be someone new, to create a life I never could have imagined." "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked. "Do you ever wish you had stayed dead, that you had not come back?" "Never," Willa said fiercely. "Not for one moment. Yes, I loved Thomas, and yes, I mourned him deeply. But Victor, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the father of my children. What we have built together is worth every impossible moment, every questioning look, every fear I ever had about disappearing." Victor kissed the top of her head. "I feel the same. I spent 12 years wandering, looking for something I could not name. And then I found a wedding dress in an attic, and the woman who wore it was waiting downstairs, and everything changed. You changed everything, Willa." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, each lost in their own thoughts but tethered together by love and history, and the impossible miracle that had brought them together. The years continued to pass, marked by the usual milestones of family life. Thomas started school and proved to be an excellent student, particularly in mathematics and science. Grace discovered a talent for drawing and filled sketchbooks with remarkably detailed renderings of animals and plants. Willa and Victor watched their children grow with pride and wonder, marveling at the individuals they were becoming. The Zimmerman property became one of the most prosperous in the area, known for quality wool and fruit. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the children and a proper office for Victor. Willa created a beautiful garden that became the envy of every woman in Oro Grande, filled with flowers and herbs and vegetables that seemed to thrive under her care. In 1892, when Thomas was 10 and Grace was 7, Willa gave birth to twin boys, James and Jonathan. The arrival of 2 babies at once created cheerful chaos in the household, but Willa and Victor managed with help from their older children and the household staff they now employed. Thomas proved to be remarkably good with his baby brothers, patient and gentle in a way that surprised even his parents. Grace was more skeptical at first, displaced from her position as the baby of the family, but she eventually warmed to the twins and became fiercely protective of them. On the twins' first birthday, the family held a large party at the house, inviting what felt like half of Oro Grande. Tables groaned under the weight of food, children ran wild through the orchard, and adults gathered in clusters to talk and laugh. As Willa looked around at the celebration, at the life she had built, She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Victor found her standing alone for a moment, watching the festivities from the porch. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Willa said simply. "I died alone in an attic, consumed by grief and regret, and now look at me. I have a husband I adore, 4 beautiful children, friends, a home, a purpose. How did I get so fortunate?" "I ask myself the same question every day," Victor admitted. "But Willa, this was not just luck. You made choices. You chose to live when you came back, chose to embrace this second chance rather than hide from it. You chose love over fear. That took courage." Willa turned in his arms to face him. "We chose each other," she said. "That was the most important choice either of us ever made." They kissed, heedless of the party guests who might be watching, 2 people still deeply in love after more than a decade of marriage. As the children grew older, Willa began to think about the dress again, the wedding dress that still sat in the attic trunk. She had altered it once, transforming it for her wedding to Victor, but most of the original gown remained intact, packed carefully away. "I would like to do something with it," she told Victor one evening. "Something meaningful." "What did you have in mind?" Victor asked. "I am not entirely certain," Willa admitted, "but I keep thinking about other women, other young brides who might not be able to afford a beautiful dress. What if I used the fabric and lace to create something for them? What if I could transform this symbol of my grief into something that brings joy to others?" Victor smiled at her, his eyes warm with admiration. "That is a beautiful idea. How would you go about it?" Over the next several months, Willa worked with the women of her sewing circle to create a lending library of wedding dresses. She carefully deconstructed her original gown, using the silk and lace and pearls to create 3 beautiful but simpler dresses that could be borrowed by brides in need. Other women contributed as well, donating dresses or fabric or trim, and soon they had a collection that was available to any woman in Oro Grande who wanted to be married in something beautiful. The project brought Willa a deep sense of satisfaction. She had taken something that represented death and transformed it into celebration. She had turned mourning into joy. It felt like completing a circle, honoring both the woman she had been and the woman she had become. In 1899, Thomas turned 17, a young man on the verge of adulthood. He had his father's height and his mother's dark hair, and he possessed a quick mind that had earned him a scholarship to a university in San Francisco. The prospect of him leaving filled both Willa and Victor with pride and dread in equal measure. "He will come back," Victor assured Willa as they discussed Thomas's impending departure. "Oro Grande is his home. He will want to return." "I know," Willa said, "but it still feels like losing a piece of my heart. Is this what parents always feel when their children grow up?" "I suspect so," Victor replied. "We raise them to be independent, to stand on their own, and then we have to let them go and trust that we have prepared them well enough." Thomas left for San Francisco in the fall, and the house felt emptier without his presence. But Grace stepped up to help more with her younger brothers, and life continued its forward motion. Grace herself was 15 now, a beautiful young woman who had inherited the best features of both her parents. She had suitors already, young men from town who found excuses to visit the Zimmerman property, but she showed little interest in any of them. "I am not ready to think about marriage," she told her mother when Willa gently inquired. "I have things I want to do first. I want to study art, maybe travel, see something of the world beyond Oro Grande." Willa understood completely. "Then you should do those things," she encouraged. "Do not let anyone, including your father and me, pressure you into settling down before you are ready. Live your life fully, Grace. It is the most precious gift you have." The twins, James and Jonathan, were 7 now and as different as 2 boys could be despite sharing a face. James was outgoing and adventurous, always climbing trees or exploring the far reaches of the property. Jonathan was quieter, more contemplative, happiest when reading or helping his mother in the garden. Victor and Willa had grown into their roles as parents with a grace that surprised them both. They made mistakes, of course, but they learned from them and tried to do better. They raised their children with love and discipline in equal measure, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. As the new century dawned in 1900, the Zimmerman family gathered for a photograph. Victor and Willa stood in the center, their hands clasped. Thomas, home from university for the holidays, stood behind his father. Grace stood beside her mother, one hand resting on Jonathan's shoulder while James fidgeted beside his father. They were a family, bound not just by blood but by love and shared history. Looking at that photograph in later years, Willa would remember the weight of Victor's hand in hers, the sound of the children's laughter, the feeling of complete and utter contentment. She had been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life and love, and she had made the most of every moment. The years continued their march forward. Thomas graduated from university and returned to Oro Grande to help run the family business, bringing with him new ideas and modern approaches that helped them expand even further. Grace eventually attended an art school in Los Angeles, pursuing her passion for drawing and painting. The twins grew into young men, each finding their own path. Victor and Willa aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver but their love remaining as strong as ever. They celebrated their silver wedding anniversary in 1909 with a party that drew people from all over the county. They danced together just as they had on their wedding day, moving in perfect synchrony, 2 people who had become one through years of partnership and devotion. 25 years, Willa marveled as they swayed to the music. A quarter of a century together. Sometimes it feels like no time at all, and sometimes it feels like I have loved you forever. You have loved me forever, Victor said seriously. From the moment I found that dress in the attic and you were waiting downstairs, we were connected. Everything since then has just been us discovering what that connection means. Willa rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I am so grateful, she whispered, for all of it, for you, for our children, for this life we have built. I was given a miracle, Victor, and I have tried my very best to be worthy of it. You are worthy of every good thing, Victor assured her. You are the best person I have ever known, and I am honored to be your husband. They continued to dance as the party swirled around them, 2 people still deeply, madly in love after 25 years of marriage. The children married and had children of their own, making Victor and Willa grandparents multiple times over. Their house became a gathering place for family celebrations, filled with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren. Willa delighted in her role as grandmother, spoiling the little ones and telling them stories about the old days. As they grew older, Victor and Willa often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the orchard they had planted together so many years ago. They spoke less as the years went on, having reached that comfortable place where words were often unnecessary, but the silence between them was rich with understanding and affection. In 1920, on a warm summer evening, Willa turned to Victor and said something that had been on her mind. I am not afraid of dying anymore. I did it once before and it brought me to you. If it happens again, I will go peacefully, knowing that I lived a full and beautiful life. Victor took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 77 years. We have many years left, he said firmly. I am not ready to let you go. And I am not ready to leave, Willa assured him. But when the time comes, whenever that may be, I want you to know that I have no regrets. You gave me everything I could have wanted and more than I ever dared to dream." They sat together as the stars emerged, each lost in memories of the decades they had shared. They had built a life that defied explanation, a love that transcended death itself, and a family that would carry their legacy forward into the future. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of planting and harvest, births and weddings, joys and sorrows. Victor and Willa remained at the center of their growing family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1925, on their 41st wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party that seemed to include everyone they had ever known. The house and grounds were decorated with flowers and ribbons, tables groaned under the weight of food, and music filled the air. Thomas, now in his 50s with silver threading through his hair, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have shown all of us what true love looks like. You have built something beautiful together, not just this property or this family, but a partnership that has weathered every storm and emerged stronger. We are all blessed to be part of your legacy." Glasses were raised, and Willa felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Victor, at the man who had found a wedding dress in an attic and given her a second chance at life, and felt her heart overflow with love. "Thank you," she whispered to him, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "For everything. For believing in the impossible. For loving me so completely." Victor kissed her forehead, his lips lingering there. "Thank you for coming back," he whispered in return. "Thank you for choosing life, for choosing me, for making every day an adventure." They stayed at the party for hours, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, but eventually they slipped away to their bedroom. They undressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces as they had done for 4 decades, and came together with a tenderness born of long familiarity and deep affection. Afterward, they lay tangled together as they always had, skin against skin, hearts beating in harmony. Neither spoke, but both felt the weight of their shared history, the miracle of their love, the gratitude for every moment they had been given. Victor passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928, at the age of 85. He went to bed beside Willa as he had done for 44 years, kissed her goodnight, and simply did not wake up. Willa found him in the morning, still peaceful, still beautiful to her eyes, and felt her heart shatter even as she understood that this was the natural order of things. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the life Victor had lived and the impact he had made. Willa stood dry-eyed through the service, drawing strength from her children and grandchildren, but at night, alone in the bed she had shared with Victor for so long, she allowed herself to grieve fully. "I miss you," she whispered into the darkness. "I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe, but I will carry on, my love. I will live well and love fiercely and honor the life we built together. And when my time comes, I will find you again. I believe that with everything in me." Willa continued to live in the house for several more years, surrounded by family and memories. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry, held her great-grandchildren, and remained sharp and engaged with the world around her until the very end. On a spring morning in 1932, Willa woke with a sense of clarity and peace. She was 83 years old and had lived 57 years in her second life, far longer than the 19 years of her first. She called her children to her bedside, all 4 of them now well into middle age, and spoke to them clearly. "I want you to know," she said, her voice still strong despite her age, "that I have lived the most extraordinary life. I was given a gift that defied all logic and reason, and I tried my very best to be worthy of it. You are all part of that gift, and I am so proud of the people you have become." Thomas held her hand, tears streaming down his face. "We love you, Mama. We are not ready to let you go." "I know," Willa said gently, "but it is time. Your father is waiting for me. I have missed him every day for the past 4 years, and now I get to see him again. That is not something to mourn. That is something to celebrate." She spoke with each of her children individually, sharing memories and wisdom, saying the things that needed to be said. Grace brought Willa's sketchbooks, filled with drawings from throughout the years, and they looked through them together, remembering. As evening fell, Willa asked to be alone for a while. She sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the orchard that she and Victor had planted together so many decades ago. The trees were old now, gnarled and magnificent, still producing fruit after all these years. "I am ready," Willa said quietly, speaking to Victor as if he were sitting beside her. "I am ready to come home to you." She closed her eyes, a smile on her face, and slipped away as peacefully as falling asleep. Her children found her there an hour later, still smiling, at peace in a way that transcended grief. They buried her beside Victor, under the cottonwood tree where he had proposed all those years ago. Her headstone read, "Willa Zimmerman, 1849–1932, beloved wife, mother, and miracle." She lived fully and loved completely. The house passed to Thomas, who maintained it carefully, preserving the rooms his parents had shared and the memories they had created. He told his own children and grandchildren the story of how his parents met, though he left out the more impossible details, focusing instead on the love that had defined their relationship. The wedding dress, or what remained of it after Willa's various transformations, was eventually donated to a historical society. Women who borrowed dresses from the lending library Willa had created never knew that the lace on their collars or the pearls on their bodices had once been part of a dress sewn by a grieving woman who later defied death itself. Years passed, and the story of Victor and Willa became family legend, passed down through generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still gathered at the old house for reunions, walking through the orchard and sitting on the porch where their ancestors had built a love that transcended all logic and reason. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set just right, people swore they could see two figures on that porch, sitting close together, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge. Whether it was memory or miracle, no one could say for certain. But those who saw it always felt a sense of peace, a reminder that true love never truly dies. It simply transforms into something eternal. The Zimmerman legacy continued through the decades, the orchard still producing fruit, the house still standing strong, and the family still gathering to celebrate the love that had started it all. Victor had found a wedding dress in the attic, and the woman who wore it had been waiting downstairs, and from that impossible beginning had grown a family, a life, and a love story that would be remembered for generations to come.